Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. So, welcome to a class overview for Kingsvein. So, I'm gonna go ahead and start this off with the four classes that you actually start with. But as we progress on, just know that there's really no way to cover all the classes in this game without getting into spoilers to at least some extent. So, bear that in mind. That if you are looking to go into this experience with just no information whatsoever, you're gonna want to go ahead and kind of tune off after that point. All right. So, let's go ahead and get started here. So, the three that you start with are going to be the Knight, the Chisel, and the Mystic. So, let's go ahead and start off with the Knight. So, the Knight is going to, in many ways, be your movement specialist, being somebody that's able to knock stuff back. Don't know why I'm repeatedly going through all these different things here when I can just go select Knight right now. But anyways, they're going to contain a lot of the moves that you're going to need to solve a lot of the puzzles that you'll run into. But additionally, while a lot of their skills seem kind of basic, they've actually got a lot more long-term utility than it may initially seem. So something like Bash is something that you're going to start off with. It's your standard push move. You're able to knock stuff backwards. Additionally, they've got a charge forward that allows them to hit somebody at range with a shorter range weapon. And they've also got a Bide that will give them a very significant damage boost if you manage to get anything to stay still long enough to get hit by this. Additionally, you have Ready, which is basically Overwatch, except it's with a melee weapon, and then Brave, which will increase your physical attack for a couple of rounds. Now, these will end up going up, obviously, for every additional rank. Every time that you double rank something, you'll end up going and getting additional bonuses for it. I believe these can each go up to 3, and then 4 with equipment. So, for all these different skills, just bear in mind that they are simply another piece of the puzzle. This is going to be a running theme for every one of these classes, but every one of them is just another thing to be used in kind of combination with something else. There really isn't going to be the kind of standard RPG thing of like you get the powerful move and then you never have to think again. It's one of the reasons that I really love this game. So, for example, like let's say something like Ready. You know, on paper it's a defensive move because you're going to run forward. You know, you're going to defend a choke point, and if somebody attacks you, you'll go and end up getting that ready attack. However, let's say, for example, you've got something like the Bash that's going to push a target 2 tiles. Let's say, then again, that we have our units set up something a little bit like this, where you've... Here, come on, cooperate, there we go. It's like, let's say... is it going to show my mouse? It will. So, like, let's say we've got Zavard over here, and he's going to go ahead and he's going to bash something from right here through these 2 tiles. They're going to get pushed back 2 tiles. Now, say you had 2 knights that had readied attack abilities. Both of them are going to take swings as that target is passing by them. So bear that in mind that you can combine those in all kinds of fun ways. Like, for example, let's say this one had Bide that was already being set up. These two had swords these two, you know, pretend D-Dragon over here is another knight. Actually, technically, he can use knight skills, I believe. So, yeah, he would be able to use Ready. So that way, they would essentially get two attacks as well as being in position for a Bide. Now, that being said, you know, they pushed them back. But additionally, let's say their weapons were modified in such a way that they could use what the hell is it called? It's like the sticky gland thing, I think it's what sticky something, I think is what it's called. But effectively, on hit, it reduces movement by 1. So you push back, they both end up getting those sticky effects off, they can't move anymore, and now they're sitting in front of the target with the Bide. That Bide has been ranked up, they got some armor that's modified to improve it. And they're suddenly doing like, what is it, like 350-something% damage or something like that with its final version. So bear that in mind, that on the easier difficulties, you can get by just playing it presumably like a standard RPG there. But then when it comes to combining all these skills as you get into the higher difficulties, as well as later on in the game, you're going to want to combine these a lot more. So, like, for example, Brave has great utility for a lot of ranged units. Since any of your classes can equip any weapons, this basically means that this can apply to anyone. So, for example, say you wanted to have a melee weapon, and then you had an offhand crossbow. Let's say you had no targets available. You might use a turn to use Brave to then improve your crossbow shot, take that shot, and then go back to fighting normally. Remember that shields will assist you in terms of having more health, but in many cases you might be better off just going for multiple weapons instead. So again, keep that in mind, that you want to use all of these in a more piecemeal kind of fashion, that you want to combine them all together into different kind of interactions of their own. Alright, next up we'll move on to the second class you'll likely run into, and that is going to be the Mystic. So the Mystic is going to be your standard spellcaster, and again, going to solve a lot of your magic-related problems and puzzle-related problems. So, obviously, while we do have the normal aspect of winning fights, every one of these things also applies in combat. So, like, earlier, this bash also allows you to bash things forward and stuff like that. But like, let's say, you know, there was a dresser in your way and you wanted to bash it out of the way, there you go. So, in the case of the spells, it's the same thing. So, fire is going to be something that you interact with quite a decent bit. So your Mystic is going to be able to set things on fire, whether it's lighting a furnace, whether it's lighting a nearby sconce, stuff like that. It's going to not only help you with light, but like, for example, if you wanted a temporary light source, like say it was too dark in that area, you might just go and light up that area right now, or, you know, if there's a sconce, you might be able to light it for a longer period of time. Just bear all of these interactions in mind. Or, for example, like this, let's say there's an interaction right here where we see that there's an ambush if we were to enter this room. However, as soon as we do that, obviously there would be a fight. So let's say we used our skills to then pull some sconces nearby here, set them back up by activating them. So like if we okay, that one's a bit too far. I might get a little bit closer. Still too far. There we go. We'd have to be around the corner. I don't want to start the fight here. Anyway, so point is, we can use our skills to then move stuff around into this position. So we'll get into some of our other abilities that we'd want to use for something like these right here in a moment. But these kinds of tricky setups are pretty handy in terms of being ready for higher difficulties. We'll just switch over to Steam Deck controls here real quick. Okay, so again, bear that in mind as far as those go. So arc is also going to be your way to attack in diagonals. So when you fire off an arc, let's see, who's got an arc? You've got an arc. So, like, let's say for his base, okay, we don't need our basic attacks, we need our spells. So these can kind of jump between targets. So if we fired here, we'd be able to skip a tile over here. If we, let's say, fired right here, we'd be able to attack at a diagonal right there. As you rank this up, this will have much longer range, but there's going to be cases where you want to hit around corners, so this would help for that particular in that particular aspect. So in some cases, let's say you wanted to go into a room and say you had it ranked up, then you might, for example, be able to do something like, you know, you fire... sorry, it keeps kind of going dark in the background. Steam overlay keeps coming up every time I switch to the mouse. But like, let's say we see that guy's over there, so we say like diagonal, 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 and we would be able to basically go and hit this guy around the corner before the fight even starts to bait them into a trap. So yeah, as far as hitting targets around corners or just you know, maybe even testing whether there is something around a corner if you're looking for an ambush or something. That's got a lot of utility, and additionally, obviously, it can be used for the normal thing of hitting multiple targets and or electrifying any blood that's on the ground. Alright. Next up, we've got the Burst. This is going to allow you to move things. So, for example, if we wanted to go and burst this same sconce that we were talking about, I'm going to use these as an example because they're a nice little simile for a lot of things. But say we wanted to go use this and kind of move it into position to target that guy down the road, then now we might want to go set up that. And once we have higher ranks, then we'd be able to basically just push it into the guy as a way to start the fight. So, anyways, just a fun little interaction there. So we'll go ahead and light that once again. And now, hopefully, once they get started, slightly too far. Come on. Put it back up. There we go. So anyways, if we got it into position, like we see that we could put it right there, then we would be able to start the fight by attacking him with this sconce instead. Again, this might seem a bit much if you just started the game and, you know, you're kind of still in that, oh yeah, there's pebbles in the way. I guess that would make it a little bit of a problem, huh? It's like if you just started and you're thinking, like, why would you bother setting all this stuff up? Just go fight something. there's going to be pretty difficult fights throughout the game, and you know, if you have the ability to go and you know, set some of these things up ahead of time, maybe have a few traps and choke points and things like that ready to go, it would give you a lot of potential advantage in a fight. You don't want to rely on just your arm, you want to rely on your environment and all of these other things as well. So in this case, like I could use the combat chain over here to go ahead and pull these over here to create a choke point that they can't really pass. So we'll go ahead and reset our party right here. We'll go ahead and set these on fire. And now we have a gigantic advantage going into this fight. So as soon as this thing were to start, we now have essentially 3 traps that we can go trigger whenever. We've created a choke point that they would be forced to go through. So either way, it's going to be really helpful stuff. We might want to position somebody nearby that door to make sure that they're not trying to sneak through there. But anyways, this actually gets us over to the next thing over with the Mystic, where in their case, they also have access to Blood Spikes. So Blood Spikes are going to be the first of your trap moves here, allowing you to set down spikes somewhere. Now, it's not just a trap, just so you know. So as far as the spikes go, there's something that can be used to set up traps, sure, but they're also going to be they're also actually going to be a really powerful damaging move if there's blood underneath a target. So it actually crystallizes whatever's under that target into a giant spike in and of itself, meaning that if, for example, there was a lot of fighting in a particular area, this suddenly will do a lot more. So it can potentially do up to 6 extra damage at base rank. So that's just a useful tool to bear in mind. Here, let's go put more spikes over here since I accidentally wandered into one of them. And let's go ahead and continue on. So, that's going to be the Mystic stuff here. Oh, and actually also Absorb is going to be your way to basically get rid of all debuffs. So whether there's positive effects on the other guy, or whether there's terrain effects or debuffs on your own guys, Absorb just allows you to heal MP while also absorbing those effects. So if, for example, a target is poisoned, or if they're bleeding or whatever else, this is just going to be a handy way to kind of improve your situation very dramatically. Alright, so next up, let's go ahead and cover the Chisel. So this is going to be, the Chisel is going to be your first kind of unlock class, more than likely. Ramir is going to start off with access to this one. And this is also going to be your first, like, actual legitimate damage dealer, as far as that actually being their purpose. So one combination I want to bring up here. Lacerate, then Gouge, then Sunder, then Shatter. Is kind of how you want to generally go about this. So Lacerate will give you a bleed effect. Bleed will cause a target to take more damage the more that they move. So for example, you lacerate and then you knock backwards. If, for example, you take the one of the Knight abilities, which allows somebody to counter, and you give them a shield in their primary weapon slot, they will counterattack with a shield. So if a target is bleeding, and suddenly they're knocked backwards every time that they're attacked, that suddenly will give them essentially will give them a lot more lacerate damage. So there is a later skill that will be able to do this without a shield, but just so you know, that is something that you have access to pretty much immediately. So again, this will cause them to take more damage for every tile that they move, and if you can knock them backwards, that can be really, really useful. Gouge will blind a target. Now, this isn't the standard blind that you see in most RPGs. It essentially, it doesn't prevent them from hitting, but it does cause skills to only work at point-blank range. So this is a great way to, let's say, shut down ranged units and things like that. But generally, blind, at least in my personal experience, hasn't necessarily been as useful as some of the other ones. Normally, when I put Gouge on there, it's for the purpose of combining with Shatter, which we'll get to later. Sunder is going to deal 50% of your normal damage, and then also hit them with Fragile. So Fragile will increase all damage by 30%, and again, will stack with something like Shatter. So Shatter is kind of the finale of all of this, that you'll do 80% of your normal damage, and then an additional 30% per each negative status effect on the target, and 30% per ally adjacent to the target. So if you surround that unit, you've hit them with like poison, bleed, blind, fragile, it's really good. It takes some turns to set up, but you're still attacking that whole time, so it's just good stuff. Combine that in with something like Flanker and Venom, and yeah, no, that thing's getting deleted. So really, really good combination there. And additionally, as far as utility moves go, you've already seen it used here, but the chain can be used to pull instead of push. So whether you want to move props around or you want to have a unit getting pulled into a trap, this is just a really good utility move. You'll get an additional +1 rank for every time that you level it up. So just bear that in mind, that the chain is a really useful tool. It is very expensive to rank up, but that +1 range can have a lot of very wide-reaching applications. Okay, so with the basic skills covered, let's go ahead and cover passives real quick. So on the Knight, we've got Counter, Opportunist, and Stoic. So Counter is going to counter attack with 25% damage. Now that's not very much, and there's skills that can improve this later, but personally I found this particularly useful with a shield, since they weren't necessarily doing too much damage anyway, and then you essentially use that shield for knockback in combination with Lacerate to get a lot of extra damage off of Lacerate. Next, you've got Opportunist here, which if you attack on a turn that's not yours, you do an additional 50% damage. So remember what we talked about earlier about using the Ready skill in combination with knockbacks to allow everybody to have additional attacks? This increases every one of those attacks by 50%. So you can essentially just create a conga line of death with something like Opportunist. And then you've got Stoic, where when preparing a delayed weapon attack, you're immune to pushes and pulls. Now, while the obvious answer is, well, go use this with Bash, this also is just a really good defensive ability, as it allows you to be prevented from moving if, for example, you run into a boss fight that's got a lot of movement, or if you run into any particularly movement-centric enemies and you're nearby a cliff. So Stoic is potentially a way to use Bash to defensively stance yourself in a situation where you're nearby a cliff. So, again, remember that this does have defensive applications there. Alright, next we're going to go ahead and talk about the Mystics abilities here. So draw powers, an additional +1 fire, +1 arcane per blood pool nearby at a max of 2. Essentially just means if you're already winning the fight, this will give you a bit more momentum. Now, essentially +1 per adjacent flame, it does, again, it does work with other fire effects. So if you wanted to go like full meme build and do this with lanterns, then yeah, it's just kind of funny. The lantern necklace combined with your draw power, you could potentially, in theory, be doing like 5 damage at base with a frickin' lantern. So just kind of amusing. And again, this will go up with other passives over time. Then you've got War Mage, which will do an additional +1 for every element type to adjacent enemies. Again, works with Lantern 2. And then Ley Lines, where at the end of your turn, if you're at a sigil or fortification, you get its bonus for 2 turns. This isn't very useful in the early game, but then later on, when you start seeing sigils and fortifications more often, this could be a really big deal for keeping a target well defended with something like a fortification. So this one's a bit more situational. It's probably not one that you'd keep around all the time, but it can be a game changer in certain fights. So, first of all, don't assume that you're going to make one perfect build and then you never touch it again. You constantly want to be swapping this stuff out for different situations. Okay, and then lastly, we've got the Chisel. Well, I say lastly, there's actually one more class to cover, but we'll get to that in a moment. So then we've got Venom on the Chisel. This gives you poison, and essentially will double up on that poison if you apply it twice. Personally, I found this really useful on ranged characters. For example, with your extended range bows and stuff like that, you can just drop a bunch of Venoms before the fight even starts. Gives you a good little advantage. Obviously, once units are running around like a 50 HP health bar, it's a bit less useful in that situation, but combined with everything else, it is still a useful tool. So every skill is still going to be handy throughout the entire game, but yeah, just certain things will have different implications as you go on. Alright, then we got Flanker. A bit more situational here, with weapon attacks dealing plus 25% damage to enemies with an ally behind them. Mostly this is for use in combination with Shatter. If you're using Shatter a lot, Flanker might be what you want for this. It kind of skyrockets its damage. Otherwise, it's not necessarily the end of the world to skip this one. Then you got timed hits, which will do an additional 30% weapon damage if you press the A button just before damage is dealt. So for this one, I want to say it's actually like a solid half a second before the actual hit lands. So I want to say this feels like kind of like a... I know it's meant to be a Super Mario RPG, but it feels almost like the reverse of the Dark Souls parry timing-wise, where there is a pretty decent window before you actually hit that you can go and land this. So bear that in mind. But yeah, this is basically just a free 30% damage in most situations. So really handy stuff there. And then low profile, which I have to say I wouldn't use low profile on most characters, but there is a fun little niche for this. But low... Come on, why are you not going to it? There we go. So, low profile, become invisible for 1 turn. When you end your turn adjacent to 3 visible allies and no enemies. Now, what's interesting is that this actually means that you stand between 2 of your allies, not 3. So it basically just means, while it does say adjacent to 3 visible allies, it counts the person turning invisible as one of those allies. So you stand between 2 of your buddies and you're invisible. Now this is really, really solid, but it's also a nice little backup plan if you started off with the Stalker class and wanted to essentially start off your kill chain a little bit early. This does potentially allow you to go kind of go into stealth mode and start that whole process going if your party's starting to get wiped out. Niche use case, but still, I thought it was pretty fun. Okay, and then lastly, the 4th class that you start with is the War Beast. Okay. So the War Beast is going to be your mount. To start off with, you won't necessarily have access to more classes. You can through this, but we're going to cover that last year. So let's go ahead and go over their abilities here. So Shove is basically Bash. You've got Drag, which is basically Chain, except at 1 tile range. You've got Saddle, which allows you to drop your rider or make somebody else hop on top. So this just allows you to swap riders. Very useful stuff if you need to have somebody saved. So if somebody's suddenly low on health or what have you, you can use this ability to pop them on your back, which means that your mount will now suddenly take over as their health bar. So we'll get into more implications of this later, but just bear that in mind that this is one of the best save moves that you can have. This is basically the Fire Emblem, pack a unit into your pocket kind of situation. You've got Chomp, which will deal 75% of your normal damage and inflict -1 strength and movement for 2 rounds. Again, can rank up just like everything else. Very, very strong move, just from start of the game to finish. This is something that I pretty much was always opening with. So pretty much their premier attack move, but just -1 damage and movement is very hard to to say no to. And then lastly, you've got Dash, which doesn't take an action. It just allows you to do a little bit of extra movement. Again, can be ranked up like everything else. So they're kind of like a modified version of the Knight in many ways, with some utility to go and save others. So nice movement class. Just generally you never want to take that off there. Also, I'm pretty sure you can't. So, well, technically you can, but you shouldn't. All right. Next up, as far as their passives, we've got Cavalry, where when you have a rider, you take -25% damage. Really good if you're using them to save other units. Free Spirit, where if you don't have a rider, you gain damage bonuses of all kinds. Combat Supplies, where at the end of your turn, you'll recover +1 MP. This one I figure is dang near mandatory for your mount, because they don't have much MP. When you're KO'd, your rider gains half of your MP and negate for 3 rounds. So effectively, this one is one of the best abilities, full stop. Treader, take no damage from walking on fire or spikes, and your move and jump cannot be reduced. Generally doesn't come up that often, considering the other passives that they can get. Like, I consider Combat Supplies to just be a mandatory one, but generally Treader, usually they can just jump over most traps, but if you're running into situations where you want to have them charge forward through traps a lot, I guess that might be handy for you. More or less, this is just here primarily in the same vein that a lot of the boot items are there for the rest of the cast. So yeah. As far as this goes, it's a bit more situational. I will say though, if you're traversing around, like if you're doing a lot of exploration when you're on your mount, it would be useful in that situation, since they would get slowed down and/or damaged if you're running around and let's say you just were kind of dumbly exploring into a room and ran into a bunch of spikes or something. Like, yeah, there's that. If they're low on health, it prevents them from being knocked out, so I guess there's that. But yeah, wouldn't consider that one of their better ones. Anyway, that being said, let's go ahead and get into the other category here, which is going to be your upgrades. So these are going to be class specific, but basically upgrades are going to be as you use that class, you'll get points. These points are exclusively locked to that class, but can be used to get specific class upgrades that are permanently available over there on the left. You see that diamond bar right over here? That's where these will end up stacking up. So as you go on, you will get upgrades of various kinds from these different classes. If you have these points, you might as well spend them unless there's something specific on this pile you're going for. There's typically 4 for every class. So for example, for the knight, they're able to get increases to their health, as well as permanently upgrading their spear, flail, and sword damage. For the mystic, they can upgrade their MP and additionally improve their fire, earth, or both ice and ruin types of damage. So I say fire, but it's also lightning, by the way. And again, this will scale with. To use the lantern example again, just all sources of fire damage will deal +1 whenever you see that icon. So that will be something that you can combine with a lot of different things. Once we get into the more advanced classes, which actually, now that this has been going on a while, I think the advanced classes are just going to be their own video. Because I gotta get going. But yeah. So all sources of fire damage are increased. Geo Adept is a little bit more niche, since there's not as many soil-based skills, but like skills like Earthquake, which you can get pretty early on into the game and can hit an entire room at once. It's really worth investing into something like that. You usually will not be able to max out everything, just so you know, not in any reasonable sense. So typically just kind of pick one, but yeah, these will get extremely expensive as you go on. And then Ruin Adept, which will do the same thing for Arcane and Ice. I don't know if it's actually officially called Arcane, but just like Dark, I guess is the way to call it, because that's also what Poison uses. And then lastly, we have the Chisel, which will get Evasion, Swords, Spears, Flails, and Stealth Sense. So Stealth Sense is an additional +1 to damage while invisible, and for 1 turn after. So combining this with something like Low Profile, and/or if you're using the Stalker at the start. If I mention a lot of stuff that's useful with a Stalker, by the way, it's what I did my first playthrough with. I really love that class, and it was just really fun to do all those long kill chains. I actually thought it was a bit more flimsy than the others, but then realized once the stats rolled at the end of the game, they only got knocked out 8 times throughout the entire playthrough, which is like, I expected that to be way higher, but apparently it's everyone else that was getting knocked out. Anyway, so yeah, permanent upgrades to all of these things. Bear in mind that Lacerate and all of these other skills do work with spears, so personally I consider the spear to be like the premier chisel thing, because they can potentially attack at long range. And additionally, there's some additional spear tech that you get, where if you're using a lot of the chisel abilities, and frankly most abilities that aren't like the ready skill and stuff like that, they will target a specific tile. So for example, if you're using a spear, it's like, let's say if we were to give this guy a we give them a spear over here. We go ahead and smack that over on you. There we go. And we were to, let's say, target with Lacerate, it would pick 1 tile. So it essentially allows you to potentially bypass targets. It's like, let's say you were in a position where you wanted to hit only this guy, you would be able to skip the first target, or you would be able to pick the first target. Oh, pardon me. It's doing funny things again. Anyway, so it allows you to pick targets. So that's some very useful tech as far as spears go. It just gives you a bit more play as far as deciding where your shots are going to go. So okay, that's oh yeah, actually lastly, let's go ahead and cover the upgrades for the mount. In the mount's case, they will get endurance, focus, regeneration, which a couple of things on this. So endurance and focus just upgrades to health and MP. Regeneration is like, I love regeneration. So first of all, I love it on that layer of this is one of the things that constantly kept showing up in new XCOM, and nobody ever took it because it was too situational. It is perfect in this game. This is like just pure perfection on a design level. But the healing is so limited in its base sense, and additionally comes from so many different types of sources, that this can have massive implications. So something like regeneration is amazing. Like, let's say one of the New Game Plus classes starts off with the ability for the mountain rider to have an interaction where they would end up getting health if they're paired up. Like, they would end up healing at the end of their turn. That's a regeneration interaction. Let's say they're sitting on a plant. That's a regeneration interaction. Say they're getting healed. That's obvious. Say they're getting a bandage used on them, or say they're doing an attack that causes them to get a bit of health back. That's a heal interaction. Every heal interaction is giving you +1. So this has a ton of use cases, especially in a unit with a low health bar that needs to be able to heal the entire thing immediately. There's just a lot of really far-reaching applications for regeneration, so don't sleep on that one. But the first one that I would typically recommend picking up for your mount is Clever. So this is going to be a 4.1. It's the most expensive thing they can start off with, but it allows them to have access to the Knight and Mystic classes. However, a quick note that I've seen some folks miss before, this does take 50% extra XP to actually use. So every one of their costs is going to be significantly higher, but considering that that's their 3 classes for the entire game, you'll be fine. Like, don't worry, you're not missing out on anything there. But the cool thing is that it means that your War Beast is then able to run around, and, like, let's say while you're sitting on top of them, you can go and use your push abilities, you can use your pull abilities, you can set stuff on fire, you can arc around things, you can move things around, you can set traps, and this is really useful for setting traps. Like, if you have Clever and then you have Mystic with Blood Spike, you don't have to worry about your party members running into your traps, because you can just run around using your mount to actually go and put all those down. And yeah, there are going to be better ways to lay traps through other classes down the road, but for the beginning of the game, it's a very useful little thing. You're less likely to accidentally walk into the ambush triggers that are going to get fights started, so it's just a nice way to kind of nitty-gritty your fights in the early game, you know? But typically you want to ride around on your mount when you're looking to get around faster, so it's just a nice thing to have. It also means that while not attacking, you would be able to, for example, use your mount to get rid of debuffs, or would be able to use them to push targets around. Or, for example, if they were to switch over to the Knight, allows you to set up some of those ready traps that we talked about earlier. There's a lot of potential stuff to all of this. So just bear that in mind, that those particular implications are pretty far-reaching, even though it doesn't seem like much right from the get-go. So remember, again, that all of these are not only combat solutions, but puzzle solutions as well. So use those as you see fit. Like stuff like shove and drag will still work on props out in the field and what have you. So if you wanted to rearrange the furniture in a room, you can absolutely do that. Okay, so with that being said, that is going to cover the first 4 classes that you start with. And that's just kind of basic use cases. Like, a lot of these things, again, will have more and more implications as time goes on. Like, even stuff like the Mystic will... Oh, whoops. Interesting. I did not know you could do that. Apparently E on the keyboard is just to grab nearby objects. I didn't even use mouse and keyboard for this. I love playing it on the Steam Deck. Okay. You learned something new even in New Game Plus. How about that? But just remember, again, everything is potentially another interaction for you to have on hand. So yeah, remember to keep your options open. Typically, what I would recommend is to max out, or to at least get the base levels of every one of the starting classes as soon as physically possible. Pick up Clever on your mount, and just try to have all of those options available right from the get-go. The other classes will have more advanced versions of a lot of these mechanics, and will have unique mechanics of their own, but to solve most of your problems, your starting classes are going to have a lot of things that will combine really, really well with a lot of different things. So Anyway, with that being said, again, don't underestimate any of these things. Like 4 jumps of arc is pretty crazy. And yeah, have fun with all of those. We'll go ahead and cover the intermediate classes next, as well as the advanced classes after that. So yeah, y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care, and I will see you soon.